So my plan was to make the most thorough and interesting review video of the MiRiDER ONE folding electric bike. So how did that go?
Yeah, that's a bit too dramatic for what we go for.
Hi, I'm Dave T, and apart from filmmaking, two of my main interests are cycling and caravanning. So when I got the chance to make a review video of an electric bike that folds up, it was an opportunity that I couldn't really turn down. So full disclosure here, the bike I had was kindly loaned to me by Homestead Caravans and Outdoor Leisure. However, I've not been paid for this review and no one has any control over the content of this video. I'll provide a link in the description for the MiRiDER at Homestead, and whilst I don't get any payment if you use this link, it does help Homestead, who in turn helped make this video possible. I had the bike for just 1 week, so to make up for the lack of any long-term experience with the product, I'm going to put as much detail and real-life data into this video as possible and also try and make it as interesting as I can. The bike I've been loaned is graphene grey with black trim, which perfectly suits my dull personality, some would say. But you can also purchase the bike in azure blue, solar orange, platinum silver and polar white. They occasionally do release special editions which have kind of funkier colours and slight changes to the specification, but they're usually in short production runs. The bike came equipped with this gel saddle, which I personally found comfortable for short to medium rides, but it's worth bearing in mind that it has a completely standard rail fitting, so you can easily swap it to a different saddle if you prefer. The grips are very similar to the Ergon GA3 grips I use on my mountain bike, and the broader design does help with hand and wrist pain, so they're a good choice on a bike like this with small wheels and limited suspension. The disc brakes have ample stopping power, and disc brakes are generally better in wet conditions. These cable pulled versions are easier to maintain than hydraulic, and so quite a good choice for this sort of bike. Incidentally, each brake lever has two cables. The front cable is the actual brake cable and can be adjusted by turning the threaded adjustment ferrule and then securing with the lock ring. The other cable is a sensor cable which tells the motor controller that you're braking and so cuts power. There is actually a small brake indicator in the lower left corner of the display that appears as you pull on the brakes. There's a built-in front light which is powered by the bike's main battery. To switch this on, press the up button for about 4 seconds. In my night test it performed fairly well and will certainly be enough to get you seen, but if you're doing a lot of riding on very dark roads you may want to add an additional light. There's no rear light included, but these are not expensive and are certainly easy to fit. I'd personally recommend the Moon Comet X Pro rear bike light, which is USB rechargeable, super bright and attaches with a simple elastic strap. The bike has a dinky little stand to save laying it on the ground or leaning up against walls when parked. And along with the bike you get a documentation pack which includes some getting started instructions, a strap to help hold the bike when folded, 2 keys for the battery compartment, a 2 amp mains charger with UK power cable, front and rear mudguards and a bell. Folding pedals are supplied but not fitted when shipped. The build quality on the MiRiDER ONE is actually pretty impressive. The use of a cast magnesium alloy frame gives the bike a sleek sculpted design whilst keeping the weight down. The paintwork is well finished and all of the cables are neatly encased in coil-like wrappers that can easily be removed if required for working. Also a minor bonus point for the charger, which though it is I'm sure just a generic charger, it is actually branded with a MiRiDER logo, which if you have as many chargers as I do and need to find the right one, this is a nice touch. I can't really fault the build quality, however when fitting mudguards this did highlight a minor niggle with the choice of fittings. It may just have been my bike, but the front mudguard screw was very tight to actually remove, and it's at quite an odd angle, so some care is needed not to round off the Phillips screw head. I'd have personally preferred that hex bolts were used throughout instead, but as I say, that's a really minor niggle and mainly just something to watch out for when assembling. MiRiDER are designed and assembled in Wigan, and each bike has a neat badge which shows the name and signature of the person that assembled it. The bike I was loaned was built by Richard, so well done Rich. So now we get to the fun part, which is the bike's drive system, so time to get out on the road. Because this is an e-bike, there are effectively 4 additional controls you need to be aware of. 3 buttons on the display module on the left handlebar and 1 trigger on the right. To switch the bike on, simply press the middle power button for about a second and the display will light up briefly and show the current battery level, speed, etc. Pressing the power button will then cycle the display figures between speed, trip time and distance, average speed, total ridden time and odometer, and finally max speed, total time and battery voltage. The up-down buttons change the assistance mode between 0 and 5, with 0 giving no assistance from the motor whilst pedalling. There are 3 ways in which you can actually activate the bike's motor. If you find you need to walk with the bike, then there is actually a walk assist mode, and you activate this by pressing and holding down the button and then basically just starting to walk forward. A walk assist icon appears on the screen and the motor gives some minimal assistance. Be aware that often it's actually difficult with walk modes on most of the bikes I've tried to really know if it's actually giving you any assistance or not, but it is. The second option is to simply press the throttle on the right. This will run the motor at full power without pedalling, but only up to a speed of 4 miles per hour, at which point it will cut out unless you start pedalling. Despite its appearance, the trigger seems, to me at least, to be not proportional, but instead simply on or off. The third and most common option, of course, is assisted pedalling, where the assistance level is chosen on the control unit and then you simply ride the bike pedalling as normal, but the motor assists you. Pressing the trigger whilst pedalling gives full assistance, so effectively just turns it straight up to level 5. To turn off the bike, press the power button for about 2 seconds. The motor is certainly not the quietest I've heard or used, but it's not offensively loud, so it shouldn't really be a problem. In terms of how well the MiRiDER behaves whilst riding, the first thing to cover is the lack of any user selectable gears. On the plus side, it makes the bike lighter, probably a bit lower cost, easier to maintain, and for those less experienced riders, somewhat less complex to ride. The downside is that the lack of gears means that the bike has to be designed and built with a compromised choice of gear ratio. Low gears are great for starting off and on steep hills. High gears, on the other hand, are great for faster speed. As you can imagine, the MiRiDER's one gear sits somewhere in the middle. To be honest, when I agreed to review this bike, this was actually my main concern. When testing the bike, I decided to fit my Garmin cycle computer and a cadence sensor which actually measures how fast the pedals are being turned. I then set off up and down a local hill with something like 13 metres of elevation gain over 370 metres travelled. So not massively steep, but steep enough. I made it up the hill fairly easily using just assistance level 2, starting the climb at about 40 miles per hour with my speed tailing off a bit at the top to around 12 miles per hour. The interesting thing was my cadence or pedalling speed, because that will be the same for any given speed for any rider. At 12 miles per hour my cadence was about 70, which is a nice comfortable rate. Had my speed dropped down to 10.5, then my cadence would start to be around the low 60s, and it's harder to push at low cadences. So unless your legs are strong, you might want to keep the speed up or increase the assistance from the bike's motor. I actually noticed straight away, since even pulling off on flat road with assistance turned off, it's a bit hard pedalling until you get up to 5 or 6 miles per hour. This is where the trigger throttle is actually a great addition, since to get going, especially at junctions, you can just press the throttle and get up to a comfortable pedalling speed much quicker. Would this bike get me up any hill? Well, probably not, but then again I have a much more expensive, fully geared electric mountain bike, and even on that, some hills can be a challenge. On balance, I would say that the lack of gears is more than compensated for by the motor strength. This means that pretty much all riders will be able to tackle steeper hills than they currently can under their own steam. And I'd recommend riders not to hesitate to increase the assistance mode or hit the boost trigger before they lose speed on hills. Freewheeling down hills, I comfortably reached 25 miles per hour. To pedal up to 25, my cadence would have been something like 133 RPM, which is doable for some people, but not for long. At 15 miles per hour, it's about 90 RPM, which is a comfortable pedaling rate for most people, and of course is just under the legal limit above which the assistance cuts out. So I think it's safe to say that the MiRiDER is really designed to be pedalled up to, but not usually over 15 miles per hour. Getting technical now, the power delivery of the MiRiDER uses the simpler approach of basing the amount of assistance purely on the selected level. This means that the power sent to the motor will be the same regardless of how hard you push the pedals. This can make the power delivery a little bit harsh if you start off, for example, at a high assistance level. However, because as I've already said, the gearing is a tad high for starting, you tend not to really notice this. In terms of ride feel, bikes with small wheels and short wheelbase will always have less natural stability, but you soon get used to it. Likewise, small wheels tend to roll into rather than over holes and bumps, so potholes should be avoided and off-road riding limited to level grass and gravel track. The suspension does actually do a good job of smoothing out smaller bumps and can be adjusted without tools by simply turning the outer body. The more threads on show, the firmer the ride, which is best suited for heavier riders, and the less threads visible, the softer the ride. Range is another very subjective thing with e-bikes, since this will be affected by weight, strength and technique of the rider, the terrain of course, and even the ambient temperature. MiRiDER quotes a maximum assisted range of 45 miles, which I think is achievable but very much the maximum. My albeit limited testing would suggest that something more like the high 20s or low 30s is the typical thing that you're going to expect. Now, in terms of my testing, I got about 25-26 miles out of the bike before I had to take it back, and the battery was not fully depleted at that point. It was on the last bar. So I expect, as I say, I'll get high 20s, maybe eke into the early 30s. I suspect the reason that my performance wasn't up in the 40s was because, as I mentioned before, the assistance is purely based on the setting, not how hard you actually pedal. So I think if a higher assistance level is selected, then it kind of overcompensates, making for an easier ride but a shorter range. Because I'm used to an e-bike which senses the rider's actual power input and gives a proportionate amount of additional power, by the way, they're a lot more expensive, I think, have got better results had I deliberately lowered the assistance level rather than relying on the bike doing it itself. I typically left it in 2 or 3 and was repeatedly climbing that test hill, so better range can definitely be achieved by changing the assistance level more frequently. Even with the lower range, this should be sufficient for most people, since given the realistic power top speed is about 15 miles per hour, a 45-mile ride will actually be a good 4 hours or more. If you do want longer range, then MiRiDER do actually sell additional batteries at about £300. The recommended maximum rider height is 6'4" and the minimum height is 5 foot, which is quite a range. My glamorous assistant Daniella is 5'1" and has no problem riding the MiRiDER. Meanwhile, I'm actually 6'4" and can ride the bike perfectly comfortably. The main reason for buying the MiRiDER has to be for its ability to fold up for transportation. Folding the bike is a very simple process. First, lower the seat by releasing both the upper and lower seat clamp and dropping the post down and then retightening. Or for the smallest possible transporting size, simply release the lower seat clamp and remove the seat altogether. Next, fold each pedal by pushing the pedal body in towards the bike and folding up. The handlebar stem is folded by pushing up the silver safety catch and then pushing the clamp and folding the stem in the opposite direction. Another tip here for reducing the pack size is to use the quick release handlebar clamp and rotate the handlebars to help them fold down flatter. Finally, the frame can be unhinged by pressing down on the red safety catch and pulling the black latch lever outwards. The bike will then fold in half, and there is a magnet on the front axle and rear axle to lock the two together, and also a small wheel to stop the front chainring hitting the ground. Carrying the bike is a little bit cumbersome, and it's worth noticing that if wheeling it along, the rear wheel will only turn in one direction. The stock bike weighs 17.3 kilos, but if you want to reduce the carrying weight, then removing the battery will save another 1.4 kilos, and removing the seat will lose another kilo, reducing the overall weight to just under 15 kilos. Unfolding the bike is a simple case of reversing the process and ensuring that all clamps are tight. Once folded, the bike size is reduced to 770 by 430 by 680 millimeters. There's an optional bag available to protect the bike in transport. It's not massively padded, but does come in its own bag, which could probably double up for keeping the charger in. In the boot of my Land Cruiser, the MiRiDER unsurprisingly fits quite easily. In a much smaller car such as this C1, it also does fit, but we did have to put the rear seat forward slightly, purely to accommodate the handlebars. Certainly I wouldn't get a full-size bike into the C1, so that's still a pretty good thing. I think the most likely means of transporting the bike whilst travelling would be in the boot of the tow car for caravans, and in motorhomes the garage if they have one. Whilst when folded the bike is not exactly small, it is significantly easier to transport and secure than a normal bike. Whilst filming this review, it made life so much easier to be able to just quickly chuck the bike in the back of the car and go and do some filming at a location. Also, of course, you will not have the added expense of having to buy bike racks. Just in case you are wondering, generally speaking, e-bikes are not transportable by plane due to the lithium-ion battery. The battery has a capacity of 252 watt-hours, which is 7 amp-hours at 36 volts, and can be charged either in the bike by opening the rubber seal on the side or when removed from the bike. A key is required to remove or refit the battery, and this is so that if parked somewhere, a thief is not able to simply unfold the bike and steal an expensive battery. To remove the battery, turn the key, mine was actually quite stiff, and then use the fold-out handle to pull the battery out. I found getting hold of the battery handle to unfold it was a little bit tricky, purely because there's a seal around the frame edges which tends to overlap it. So some long fingernails may be required, but it certainly can be done quite easily. If camping at an off-grid site with no electric hookup, then the ability to charge the battery out of the bike makes it more feasible to ask the site owner to charge the battery for you. The cost of the charge is something less than 20 pence. MiRiDER do actually sell a 12-volt charger, enabling you to charge the bike from a car, caravan or motorhome when you don't have access to a mains hookup. This is a little bit pricey, about £100, but it's great that MiRiDER actually do provide this option because few other major e-bike manufacturers seem to. According to the specs, a full charge of the battery takes around 2 to 3 hours, and this ties in pretty much with what I found. The battery should last for about 600 to 800 charge cycles, which is an awful lot of cycling. Because the motor is part of the rear wheel, its power cable means that removing the rear wheel is more involved than on normal bikes. For this reason, the easiest way to repair a puncture is by unseating the tyre and patching the tube in situ. This is more awkward than with the wheel off, so I would recommend adding some tyre sealant such as slime, which should self-heal most minor punctures. If you're riding further than you'd rather walk back, and you have the knowledge to undertake minor repairs, then apart from a puncture repair kit and pump, you should really carry a toolkit. I've listed here the main tools you are likely to need by the roadside. The MiRiDER does come with a 2-year warranty, though certain components are covered for only 1 year, and also it's non-transferable. There's a range of optional upgrades, accessories and parts available from MiRiDER, and probably the most useful and not likely available elsewhere is a rear luggage rack, for which they also sell several matching pannier bags. Okay, so now for some thoughts and conclusions. For campers, caravanners, motorhome users that want to take a bike to the places they visit, then the MiRiDER is a great option. Travelling with the MiRiDER is easier than with full bikes, though caravan users should probably assume they're going to be putting it in the towing vehicle's boot. Once on site, the assistance of the electric motor makes using the bike for short trips, either to shops or exploring locally, much more practical. It's also easier to drive from the campsite to another location such as the coast or maybe a forest with cycle paths and then enjoy a day cycling there. In my opinion, the MiRiDER is well made, rides well and overall is a really good folding electric bike for the price. In terms of design and build quality, my only criticisms were very minor, and when trying to review every aspect of the bike, I did have to reach out to their support team because some of the technical manuals are a little bit lacking. But they did actually respond very quickly. I'm sure that wasn't just because I'm a YouTuber, and I was actually asking about some pretty niche things, so it's hardly a big complaint. Even though some compromises have been made to make it easy to transport, this is still a very capable, comfortable and fun bike to ride. If you're looking for a bike that can be easily stored and transported and don't want to ride significantly off-road or up massive hills, then this bike is a definite winner. I was worried from the outset about the lack of gears may limit it, but actually I don't think for the vast majority of people it's aimed at, and the use case they have, it's likely to have a problem. Also, there is another MiRiDER model which does have gears and several other improvements, which may be a better option for riders wanting more range and versatility. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like me to do a review of that. Overall, I enjoyed riding the MiRiDER much more than I expected to, bearing in mind that my main ride is a plush full suspension electric mountain bike. The ride is much more comfortable than I experienced on folding bikes before, so the suspension is obviously helping, and generally, like most e-bikes, it's just fun to ride. I hope you found this video helpful and interesting, and if you have, then please do hit that like button, and please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting the bell icon to see other videos that I make. But most of all, thanks for watching.